All right, so yeah, well, I'm really excited to be here. I imagine everyone in the audience, or at least a fraction of you guys, is saying, what the hell is this guy going to talk about? Well, I promise you it's not going to be as salacious as the title would suggest, but we are going to try to have some fun here for the next 20 minutes. So I thought what I would do is first just give you a little more background about myself, who I am. I'm going to be here, we're all going to be here for the next 24, 36 hours, so hopefully as I go through this, maybe it even sparks some conversation later on tonight. I don't know, maybe even at the Bret Michaels party, for example. And what better way to do that than on a map of America, unless you're from Europe and you're not from America. So let's start right in the beginning. And see, already getting some reaction. So I was born in Iowa to two Hawkeye parents. All right, we got some Iowa fans. Cool, we're loosening up on a Monday morning. My parents did what many people who lived in Iowa did in the 1970s. They got the hell out. And they moved to Arizona. So believe it or not, I actually grew up just a few miles down the road in Tempe. So I spent all of my formative years here in Arizona. It feels good to be back home. After high school, I went to college out in the Bay Area. And then after college, I took my first job in retail at the Gap. So I cut my teeth in specialty apparel at the Gap, doing mainly supply chain functions, inventory planning and allocation. I spent about 4 years there, and then I went to business school. And while I was in business school, I made the determination that I wanted to get back into retail. I loved retail because of how fast-paced it was, how close to the consumer you could be. And at the time, I had never been in merchandising. And I believed then, I don't believe this as much now, but I believe buying and actually store operations were the epicenters of how a retail operation works. And so I was fortunate enough to get a job with Target out in Minneapolis. So in 2005, I moved out to Minneapolis, convinced my girlfriend at the time to go out with me. I don't know how I did that. And I took my first job, and it was in seasonal bath and rugs. So yes, I started in seasonal bath and rugs. So it's all things kitschy. It's all the things right now, like Santa Claus hand towels, pumpkin-shaped doormats. I like to joke that it was my grandmother's favorite job that I ever had. I did a number of different things. I ended up running the baby department. I ran frozen food for a little bit of time. But the next most important thing you need to know about me actually occurred in 2007. I met my wife on a trip to Las Vegas. Yeah, I see that look on your face. That's a story definitely for later tonight, but what you do need to know is that we started dating long distance, and we actually got married long distance. And in 2011, I think, 2011, we moved to Colorado to be together. My wife got a great job offer in Boulder, Colorado, captured perfectly by the hippie bus in the photograph if you've ever been there. And I told Target at the time, I said, look, I gotta go be with my wife. I gotta go start my family. And Target was awesome. They said, hey, why don't you go out and run stores? So like I said before, stores are an important part of retail operations, so I jumped at the chance. I ended up running my own, Ended up running my own store for a little bit of time, just outside of Boulder, and then I took over a district of stores spread across the glamorous states of northern Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, and South Dakota. I saw some of America's heartland. I was in my car 30,000 miles a year. I was a 34-year-old MBA, bagging groceries, pulling freight off a truck. I was even running security Black Friday at Cheyenne, Wyoming. But I got to see retail from an entirely different point of view. And it was probably the single best decision I've ever made in my career. And you're going to see that as we go through. And it's probably one of the big reasons I'm here today. So from then, things didn't work out for us as we had thought in Colorado. And we actually moved back to Minneapolis. So as this was going on, I called Target up and I said, hey, look, I can kind of see what's going on with technology here. I'd like to try my hand at e-commerce. And so based on my reputation, they made me the vice president of home furnishings on Target.com. I had no e-com experience whatsoever at this time. Target was just coming off the Amazon platform. Things were a little bit rough. But I actually 100% fell in love with the job. So I liked how fast-paced retail was, how close to the consumer. But in e-commerce, it's even more so. It's like everything's on steroids, and I absolutely loved it and had a tremendous amount of success. I ultimately became Target's first omni-channel merchant, running both the stores and the .com at the same time. And then I capped it all off with, as Michael mentioned, and you can see it here captured by the DeLorean, heading up a project called the Store of the Future. So I headed up a project for 2 years, which was essentially Target coming to me saying, 5 to 10 years out, Chris, why are people still coming to physical stores to shop? And what would your conception of the Target brand be in answering that question? It was an awesome job, best job I ever had. It was soup to nuts responsibility, like being the CEO of a mini brand startup inside a company. It was a great example of entrepreneurship. Everything was running through me: store design, architecture, back end, front end, technical choices, merchandising, labor modeling, supply chain and automation, you name it. Now, I ultimately ended up leaving Target last summer, so just a little over a year ago. because I came to the determination that essentially I want to go out on my own. I felt like I had done, you can see from that collective set of experiences, it's kind of unique. And so I'd done what I wanted to do in traditional mainline retailing, and I thought I had more to offer. And my father passed away when he was 38 years old on a commercial airline disaster. I was now in my 40s, and I said, you know what? I'm going to try my hand at this. I've always had a bug for entrepreneurship. Let's give it a go. So I started writing. As was mentioned, I write for Forbes, have my blog. I do a weekly podcast, videos. And I'm also trying to start up my own retail tech lab in Minneapolis. And it's devoted solely to that question of what is physical retail going to look like 5 to 10 years out? Because I believe that gone are the days where we think about physical on one hand and digital on the other. And I'm sure you guys all agree with this. But in reality, what's happened is that the hands have now come together, and they said this morning, it's all now one channel, right? All from the consumer perspective. And it's kind of mucky. I do that purposely with my hands because it's kind of a mucky experience. It's kind of a mucky channel in and of itself. But the channel is perpetual, or as I like to say, it's always on demand, or it's in the control of the consumer. It's an entirely different context by which we have to think about retail. And quite frankly, no one, including myself, knows exactly what all the answers are. And there's a great example I like to use to level set how just contextually thinking about the answer to what is retail going to look like 5 to 10 years out can be an example that can be really useful. And that has to do with a bicycle. How many people have seen the backwards bicycle experiment online? Anybody? One person, maybe two. If you have time today, I highly encourage you to check it out. It's only about 10 minutes long, and it's fantastic. But I'll give you the gist of it. So basically, there was this brilliant engineer, and he took a bicycle, and he rigged it so that if you wanted to, this is always hard to do in front of people, but if you wanted to turn the bike to the right, you actually had to turn the handlebars to the left. It's a complete mind blow. And then he did something really great. He decided to teach himself how to ride the bike. It took the engineer 8 months of consistent daily practice to learn how to ride that bike. But then he did something even more amazing. He gave the bike to his 8-year-old son. Guess how long it took his son to learn how to ride that bike? Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks for the 8-year-old and 8 months for the 40-year-old. That's about how old the guy was. So that difference, we touched on this a little bit last night in the discussion at dinner, but that difference is what the scientific community calls neuroplasticity. And that's the idea that the older we are, or the more accustomed we are to doing things a certain way, the harder it is for us to do something new. And that's exactly, in my opinion, what's going on in retail. Okay, if you look at the history of retail, bricks and mortar retail has existed since the 1960s. And for the most part, that business model was pretty much unchallenged until this decade. People learned how to do it a very specific way and had a lot of success doing it that way. Now, at the same time, we like to think that e-commerce or digitally native commerce is like the young whippersnapper on the block. But if you stop and think about it, eBay, Amazon, those guys, they've been around since the 90s, over 20 years. They have a very left-brain, analytical way of approaching the business. But omnichannel, as we just said, is really the blend of the both. So how things are going to form in the future is still very much up to determination, both on the left and the right sides of the brain. And I'm going to show you exactly some of the things I believe that already indicate where the store of the future is headed. But before I do that, I just want to set some guardrails on language. I've heard this term even thrown out a few times today, and I always say people need to be cautious. In fact, store of the future, I don't like the term. I still use it on the introductions and on my resume. But it's actually a term that's pretty fraught with peril. Whenever I hear someone say it, I usually stop them and I say, what exactly do you mean? Because quite frankly, they can usually mean one of three things. And it's important to talk about this. Number one, when you hear it, it can mean what I call the incremental idea. So those are the things we were talking about this at the break. These are the things you're always reading about in the press releases, okay, or in the earnings reports. There are those new ideas, say the latest pickup in store initiative, maybe the latest curbside delivery initiative. Maybe it's even new products and brands into your store. Sure, those things are different than what a retailer had in the past, and so they are, in essence, futuristic, but they're not true store of the future ideas, and you have to keep that straight. Because at the end of the day, they don't change the fundamental business model economics of how that retailer is doing his or her business. The second one does. That's where you see entirely new business models. That's true store of the future work. All right, great examples of that are when the financials change, the working capital dynamics are different, and you see that with things like Restoration Hardware's new showrooms or their mega stores that they're building throughout the country, or most recently, as was in the news last week, say Amazon Go and the checkout free experience that's now rumored to be around 3,000 locations in the next 3 years. And then at the tail end is number 3. And that's where most of my experience is, and that's in what I call concept work. And so that's taking a page out of the auto industry, or what you see in the concept with the concept car in the auto industry. And the idea there is you're doing live experimentation with consumers, some of which might work, and quite honestly, a lot of it could fail. But the idea is that you're testing and you're trying to learn, and that you take the lessons from both the successes and the failures, and you funnel that back in through tracks 1 and 2. Great examples of this would be Nordstrom's Local. I would say that's in the concept phase. And a year ago, I would have said Amazon Go is a great example of concept work. It was closed to the public. It was only open to employees in Seattle. But they figured it out, and now they're going to use it for scale, a la track number 2. So from my perspective, any company worth its salt or worth its weight in gold should have some degree of bets placed across all 3 of these tracks. And it just depends on the relative strength of that company's business model, how much they should put into each of them. Now, what's interesting is that Amazon is far to the right on this screen. They spend $22 billion roughly in R&D every year, $6 billion more than the next closest competitor in the US, and that's total competitors, not just retail. So it's pretty staggering. So you can see they're taking a very experimental approach and hoping those lessons fuel back into tracks 1 and 2. And the reason I highlight that experimentation is that's why I picked the title that I picked today. Now, I've never been to a swingers party. I'm just going to come out and say that right now. But I have to imagine if you're into that, you have to like to be very experimental. And today, we're going to be experimental together, and we're going to open up our mind, because the future is going to require us to be not only experimental in action, but especially experimental in the mindset by which we approach the business. So we're going to throw a party together in the last 10 minutes that we have. And for any party, the secret to any party is you have to have a great guest list. Everything begins and ends with the guest list. So our first guest is the Everyman and Everywoman. George Clooney is the perfect example of this. You got Facts, some of you guys remember this, Facts of Life in the 1980s, right? Then you had ER in the 90s. He was an Oscar winner, humanitarian, and now the guy just sold his tequila brand for $1 billion. Everything the guy touches turns to gold. Who's that in retail? Not surprising, it's Amazon. But it's not Amazon for the reasons you think and the reasons we've already talked about. It's Amazon for one specific technology that I want to call out today, and that is its visual recognition technology. Show of hands, how many people have used Amazon's visual search recognition technology in their app? I'm going to do a count because I actually like to keep track of this. 2, 3. Awesome. That's what I figured. If you do anything today, whether it's in your hotel room or maybe you're going back home, take out your mobile phone, click the camera icon in the Amazon app, hit product search, hold it up to anything in your house. If that's available in the Amazon catalog, you can take a picture of it, and it'll be sent to your house whenever you want it to be there. It's pretty staggering. And what that means is that the entire physical world starts to become our storefront. Or more importantly, as I like to think about it, our mobile phone, or you could even say devices in general, start to become our remote controls for the commercial exploration of the physical world. I'm going to say that again, one, because it's really hard to say, and I think it's also really important. Our mobile phones start to become the remote controls for our commercial exploration of the physical world. So say I like those shoes you're wearing, which I do. They're absolutely fabulous. I can take my camera out, snap a picture of anything I see around me, any sensory just inspiration that I see, and it can be waiting for me in my house back in Minneapolis as soon as I get home. That has drastic implications for how retailers start to think about their points of distribution, drastic implications for how consumer brand companies start to think about their packaging, both on shelf, on digital, and then out in the actual physical world. All right, next up. Got to have the boy and the girl next door, right? Any guesses who that is? Starbucks. They're literally next door to everyone, right? We talked about this morning, so I won't hit on it too much, but Starbucks, in my opinion, has one of the best omni-channel experiences going right now, and it's really based on their mobile app. So from a payments perspective, I think it was talked about this morning, 30% of their payments are estimated to be going through their app. No cash is changing hands anymore in a Starbucks store. They're even doing some stores that are totally cashless. But the thing I love about it, especially as you start to ladder these technologies together, is Starbucks has done a really good job of creating what I call the choose your own adventure consumer experience. Through their app, I can interact with Starbucks however I want. If I want to wait in line and pay, I can do that. If I want to sit in my driveway while I'm on my way to work and I want to order something and then walk in the store and pick it up, I can do that too. Or my personal favorite, I can stand in line at a Starbucks with a friend, be in a line 8 deep, I can pull out my app, order my coffee, it'll be ready for pickup, everyone else is still in line, and I walk over and go, hey, what's up? And they look at me like, what the hell did that guy just do? But that's coming. Putting the power and the control of consumption in consumers' hands, regardless of where we are in the world, whether we're in the store or just in the physical world altogether. All right, this next one hopefully will give you guys a little bit of a chuckle. It already has, it sounds like. The next one I call the WTF Guest. So we've all been there. It might even happen at this conference. Somebody walks in the door, and you're like, it could be happening right now, actually. Somebody walks in the door, and you go, who's that person? Why did they invite them? Why the hell are they here? Then a few hours go by, maybe you've had a few beverages, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, this could work for me. This could be good. Well, who's that in retail? Bonobos. Bonobos is the first penguin in the water on what I call the guide shop experiment. So in a Bonobo store, they sell clothes. You go in, you touch, you feel, you try them on. You can even talk to a sales associate, but you don't take anything home with you that day. This is important. The act of shopping is completely divorced from buying. The fulfillment actually happens as an afterthought through their e-commerce warehouses. Now, this has a lot of financial ramifications, too. It's lower inventory, lower working capital. It also probably takes less payroll to keep the floor looking good day in and day out. But at the end of the day, it's that separation of shopping from buying that is why I believed Walmart paid the sum they did of over $300 million to acquire Bonobos. Because how this works could be an important ingredient in how Walmart thinks about its own store of the future design, as you'll see next. Fourth, two more. The danger guest. We've all been here too, I think. So you've been at a party, or maybe it's even a relationship where you don't really know why you're in the relationship, but something keeps drawing you back. In fact, a lot of times maybe you even feel like you're the one doing all the work, but yet you're so addicted to it, you just can't get yourself out of it. Who's that in retail? It's IKEA. I'm convinced that if Dante rewrote the Inferno in 2018, IKEA would be his seventh circle of hell. Think about it. You walk into that store, you don't know where the hell you are, you're totally discombobulated at every turn. And then at the end of it, just like the danger guest that I mentioned, they make you do all the work. You got to pick your own product, heavy-ass product off the shelf, and check out. But imagine if you didn't have to do that. And yet, your people are still doing it, and they love that experience. And why? Again, it goes back to this concept of separating shopping from buying. Let's take a look at what IKEA really is. Front of house separated from back of house. The front of house of an IKEA is essentially like I just talked about with the Bonobos. Now imagine, as these technologies ladder on top of each other like I talked about, imagine instead of pencil and paper that I'm using to write down I want my Billy bookcase at the end of it, I use my mobile phone, I pay electronically, and then on the back side, in that back of house, through automation, robotic technology, people are picking and packing things as I'm shopping, essentially making the entire world the equivalent of an e-commerce doorstep for every consumer. So I can walk into a store, I could expect to have that product waiting for me at the door when I come out. It could be in my trunk, near the trunk of my car. I have kids, maybe I just drive up and I pick it up there. It's totally my choice, and all that's possible now. It's kind of like service merchandise, if you remember that back in the 1980s. Service merchandise, but on steroids because of technology. All right, lastly, every party's got to have some Italians, right? I say that in jest, partly because I don't look it, but I actually am Italian. But actually I say it because Italians are the perfect analogy for a casino. Casinos, in my opinion, I've talked a lot of tech, but casinos, in my opinion, are the #1 place that still celebrates the joy of why you come to a physical place, right? It's a very gracious experience. If you think about a casino, they actually have an entire role called host, because they want you to feel like a welcome guest every time you enter their establishment. A friend of mine who actually introduced me to my wife said to me one time, and I'll never forget, he said, Chris, in the casino business, it's about gambling. We know we're going to take your money, but we can't evaluate our success based on how much of your money we take. We have to evaluate our success based on whether or not you had a good time. And so if you start to think about the future of retail 5 to 10 years out, the only differences between a physical and digital experience are one, what we talked about already with the guide shop concept, this idea of taction, touching, feeling, trying things on, getting confidence in purchase. And then really two, as was mentioned this morning as well, the experiential aspects of retailing, the social aspects of enjoying shopping or being somewhere and creating memories with someone. And so as we look to the future of what's going to separate the haves from the have-nots in retail, it's really going to be about that. It's not going to be about how much a customer spent in our store in a given day, but whether or not they had a good time. Because that's what's going to make them come back to the store over and over again and also engage in all the other brands' experiences as well, brands or retailers' experiences as well. So there you go. It's a quick 20 minutes. Shake it up, stir it up. That's what I believe is the cocktail and the mix of how the future of retail is going to unfold. There'll be different combinations of those technologies depending on what the needs of the given brands or retailers are. But I believe you're going to start to see those permeate pretty quickly, and we already have in some degrees. If you want a great example of this, the one I would draw your attention to close would be the Uma supermarket out in China from Alibaba. It's H-E-M-A. It's a quick 4.5-minute video. If you want to see all of what I just talked about on display in some way, shape, or form, it's not the exact replica of it, but you can start to see how this is working, where consumers can enter this space and engage with it however they want. They can take stuff off the shelf, or they can merely shop, disassociate buying, and have the fulfillment completed for them as an afterthought and have the product delivered to their homes. Perfect, right on time. If you have any questions, I'm going to be here for the next, like I said, next couple of days. Encourage you guys to follow me on my blog. You can also follow me on Twitter. But really appreciate it, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much.